Andrew, this is basically acknowledging that we are in recession, the first recession since 1991.
Yes, that's right, Kieran. It really is a sad day for Australia. And I guess 29 years ago, Paul Keating, as the country's treasurer, uttered the words, "This is the recession that Australia had to have." That turned into an extremely politically damaging statement for the Hawke and Keating governments because of the unemployment that recession then caused. For obvious reasons then, as Josh Frydenberg earlier this afternoon announced a recession, he avoided a similar term, but it would have been more appropriate now than it was then had that term been used. Because of the health shutdown from COVID-19, this is the recession that we were indeed forced to have. Let's have a listen from Paul Keating back then and Frydenberg today saying we stared down economic Armageddon.
The accounts do show that Australia is in a recession. The most important thing about that is that this is a recession that Australia had to have.
Is Australia in recession today?
Well, the answer to that is yes, and that is on the basis of the advice that I have from the Treasury Department about where the June quarter is expected to be. This was the economists' version of Armageddon. In response to this 1-in-100-year global event, we put in place a series of health measures that have hit the economy hard. These were tough decisions, but these were decisions we had to take. Saving lives was our priority, and that has been the result. While tragically 102 people have died as a result of the coronavirus, it stands in stark contrast to the United States, where more than 100,000 people have lost their lives, and the United Kingdom, where around 40,000 people have lost their lives.
So with Australia now confirmed as being in a recession for the first time in 29 years, Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer, he's told us we've avoided economic Armageddon, but we're not out of the crisis by any means. He says Australians are strong and claims we've done favourably compared to other countries. Well, other countries went into lockdown earlier. Let's have a look at the figures of other countries. We see the United States down 1.3% for the quarter, Japan 0.9%, Germany 2.2%, France a whopping 5.3%, and the UK 2%. We were down 0.3%. As you can see, just like on the health numbers then, look at Italy. Well, they went into lockdown earlier, but we're better off than almost everyone on the economic front for the March quarter, just like in the health numbers. But Treasury had previously predicted a 10% fall in GDP for the June quarter, and we know 1.6 million people are on the dole before you even get to the JobKeeper subsidy. During the last recession, we had 1 million unemployed. That was the figure always quoted. Now it's 1.6 on the dole. Now, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, he's hopeful that with the restrictions coming off, we can dig ourselves out of this hole somewhat, but he says it's time for things like tax reform because we need to get business going again, infrastructure, industrial relations reform, improvements in the skills sector. He also said he will hand down changes to JobKeeper and an economic update in July, well before the October budget. Let's listen to Josh Frydenberg flag tax reform.
Tax reform is something that's on the agenda. So whether it's infrastructure, tax, industrial relations, skills, deregulation, that's what's going to drive business confidence.
What Frydenberg said this afternoon about being on track for a surplus despite the bushfires until the pandemic came along, I think is true, because around that time he was telling people it wasn't the fires, it was the virus and the travel ban with China and some of those other matters that was going to mean there was no surplus anymore. But the March quarter only shows us 1 week of an international travel ban and 1 week of shutdowns and lockdowns. Imagine 2 months of that in economic figures, which is what we'll see in the next quarter, Kieran. The difference between a recession and a depression is what the government does next. What the government does when JobKeeper runs out in September, Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers spoke about this last hour.
Now, the Treasurer says that Australia was headed for a cliff. But what he fails to recognise is that Australians are headed for another cliff in September when this government support that's in the economy is withdrawn suddenly by the government.
Yep, Andrew, it's going to be a pivotal couple of months. We know now that the budget update's going to be pushed back to July, apparently, so it can be in sync with their decisions on JobKeeper and what to do with JobKeeper, whether it be extend it, alter it, change the number or whatever else. But you're 100% right on this, the next phase, whether it be the government's support through this period where the economy's been smashed, or, as we discussed earlier in the day, the recovery phase where you've got to get the policies, both state and federal, right in order to maximise our chance of growth.
Yes, and, you know, it starts tomorrow, no doubt, with their residential construction announcement, but you've got to get infrastructure going. You've got to get spending going. The PM keeps talking about, you know, business, getting it going, but business needs some incentive, tax incentives, I guess Josh Frydenberg was alluding to there. That's obviously key for the government, whether it's encouraging the states to get rid of payroll tax, stamp duty, all the rest, but also you need investment in infrastructure. You need to borrow as a government to do that, and that seems critical. And you need JobKeeper for certain sectors that are still shut down because of this health problem and international travel problem.